Now that I have my Charles Law formula set up, solving for T2, I'm going to go ahead and plug in all my variables that I already identified after reading the question. Remember, temperature must always be in Kelvin. So when I'm solving for the new temperature that's going to relate to my new volume, I'm going to first plug in my new volume. I have to first plug in V2. And remember, I decided I'm going to start in order of how it was listed. So my V2 is 113 milliliters. My T1 that I was given is 11 degrees Celsius. So there's my 11 degrees Celsius. I have to always convert it to Kelvin in my formula. So I'm going to say plus 273. Right now, this is hanging out as a Kelvin unit. When I go to the rest of the formula, I just need to plug in V1. V1 is not going to change for this question, neither is T1, but V1 is just 135 milliliters. That goes in my denominator. Let me take a look at my units and make sure they've all canceled. I have milliliters in my numerator, milliliters in my denominator, and I'm left with Kelvin in my numerator. And that works out well because the unit for temperature for gas laws should always be Kelvin, unless the question specifically asked for you to convert it to Celsius. When we get a question like that, we'll work through it step by step. But temperature will always end up being in Kelvin. So now when I go to my calculator, I'm going to first add 11 plus 273 and get my value for that. Once I add 11 plus 273 and I have my answer for that, I'm then going to multiply that number by 113. So my numerator, once I multiply those two values, your calculator should be staring back at you with this number. 135 in my denominator, there's nothing for me to do there. It's just 135. And so now when I go back to my calculator and I take 32092 divided by 135, my calculator is going to stare back at me with a very long decimal value. Hopefully, when you are trying this out in your calculator at home, you're taking the time to plug this in and your answer on the screen matches what I have. 237.7185185. Remember, you need to always follow your rules of algebra. You want to always follow PEMDAS. So we have to do our addition first. We have to add 11 to 273 because this is really my operation in my parentheses before I can then take that value and multiply it to 113. My last step will then be to divide. So once I take my numerator divided by a denominator, I get a very long decimal. I need to go back and identify my sig figs. The only one that's going to help me identify sig figs is going to be volume. And in this case, it's just going to be my original volume, which was 135 milliliters. So 135 milliliters had 3 sig figs. These are not data because this is what I'm looking for the new volumes. Let's say you misread the question and you assumed it was data. They're still each 3 sig figs. So this question was worded where it wouldn't make a difference if you looked at it as data or not. Realistically, it's not part of the data because this is now your new condition that you haven't reached yet. This is your only portion of the data. If that's confusing to you and you want to consider both of them as data, it's going to be totally fine because they're both 3 sig figs. So once I get to 3 sig figs, the 7 bumps up this 7. And so my unit that I was left with was Kelvin. I'm going to get a final answer as 238 Kelvin. Remember, Kelvin does not have that degree sign.